There's something we've really wanted to tell you throughout all of this series, but couldn't until now. The crime Sayeed and Halawa were accused of, an act of FGM on their daughter Aisha. Medical experts on both sides of this case now say it never happened. No FGM took place. The system got it wrong.
I'll repeat that. This is a story about a crime that never happened.
Which makes it even more strange that today, right now, the state is fighting Sayeed and Halawa, trying to stop them getting their case recognised as a miscarriage of justice.
But before we bring this story up to the present day, we need to go back to the summer of 2021. Sayeed and Halawa have spent about 18 months in prison, with no sign they'll be getting out of jail anytime soon.
And a final reminder that this episode makes reference to acts of violence against young girls.
And don't forget that a TV documentary follows this series and will be available to watch at 9:35pm on November 12th on RTE1 or any time after on the RTE player.
From RTE Investigates and RTE Documentary on One, I'm Ruth Naga, and this is First Conviction. Welcome to the 6th and final episode, Limbo.
Well, I've texted her to say we are downstairs.
At the end of episode 5, Pam and Tim had travelled to Uppsala, north of Stockholm in Sweden, hoping to meet with Professor Birgitta Essen.
Welcome. Thank you. I'm so sorry we're late.
Professor Essen will become the essential witness for Sayeed and Halawa.
You are at the University Hospital, Akademiska sjukhuset of Uppsala.
Professor Birgitta Essen is one of the very few preeminent FGM experts in the world, particularly when it comes to young children. With vast experience in the field, she knows what to look out for.
First, the age of the child, because it's a person who's growing. And if you have a very young child, it's not obvious that you can see all the details.
Because of her expertise, Professor Essen has given evidence in FGM cases all over the world.
I've been in court and testify in the United States and in Denmark, and I also been asked by the Swedish police and so on.
It was in 2021 that Professor Essen agreed with Sayeed's solicitor to take on this case.
He wanted me to revise some of the evidence, the video material from the first trial. The videos taken from the first time the girl came to the hospital and the follow-up videos after some days and after some months.
If Professor Essen could physically examine Aisha, who by the summer of 2021 was about 6.5 years old, that could prove beyond doubt that an act of FGM or any attempt at FGM had never been carried out on Aisha.
But what is easy is that if you can identify the different part of the external genitalia, then you can say that this person is not cut. So that is easy to verify an intact genitalia than to say exactly what has been cut or not cut.
Remember what Professor Essen was already saying by just looking at all the medical evidence to date, was that Aisha was not a victim of FGM, that her genitals were totally intact, which is the complete opposite to what all medical witnesses had said to date in this case.
But Professor Essen did say a physical examination of Aisha was needed to confirm this.
While Sayeed and Halawa waited for their appeal to be heard, sometime in the autumn of 2021, they remained in prison, locked down, separated from their family, community, and home. Their time in prison felt like it was going on forever. 400 days became 500 days. 500 days became 600 days.
And every single day, Sayeed and Halawa thought about their 3 young children, about their development, about what their children were deprived of because they were in prison.
As parents, they were also missing out on so much, like first steps, first teeth, first words, first days in school.
Because their children were so young when their parents were sent to prison, the story they were told is that Mama and Daddy had gone to hospital to get better.
From inside their jail cells, Sayeed and Halawa were now wondering, whenever they did get released from prison, would their children even remember who they are?
As 2021 progressed, Sayeed and Halawa's new defence teams had a very clear strategy for their appeal hearing, as they fought to prove the couple's innocence.
The two limbs to our appeal were the case that the translation was poor to a level that rendered the trial unfair.
Sayeed's solicitor, James McGill.
And that there was a real doubt over the scientific evidence. And that's where we had to get the permission of the Court of Appeal to call that new evidence.
And that new evidence was a physical examination of Aisha by Professor Essen.
In March 2021, the appeal case hearing was held in Dublin. Professor Essen's report was presented to the court, but the DPP's prosecution teams disagreed with Professor Essen's findings and said it should not even be allowed to go before the court.
Not only that, but they also strenuously argued against a new physical examination of Aisha, saying that this had been done before and there is a danger of
re-victimising the child. One has to ask, what is to be gained here?
It would take 6 months for the court to even make their initial judgment, and during all that time, Sayeed and Halawa remained in prison. By August 30th, 2021, the court had at least agreed on one aspect of the appeal, and they had sided with the DPP.
We are of the clear view that a joint medical examination of Aisha is not warranted on the evidence before us, and the court refuses to the direction sought in that regard. Such an examination would cause further distress to this child, and in our view it would be a disproportionate intervention.
Professor Brigitte Essen felt the court's refusal to allow her examine Aisha was simply illogical.
In my thought, what is more traumatized for a child if you're separated from your parents for 5 years and losing the custody and being out without your mother and father in a very important period of your life? That is more trauma than meeting 3 or 4 doctors that are very trained to talk and discuss and do examination of children.
Halawa was devastated when she heard this news in prison. She felt their appeal was now doomed.
I couldn't talk. I was crying. I was upset, and they let me go to my room. And all day I was crying. We have no justice. This is not fair.
Down in the Midlands prison, news also filtered through to Sayeed.
I remember the day they rejected the application to re-examine my daughter. I remember that day. It was the day in my soul and in my heart. I was on the ground.
The new physical examination of Aisha was only one part of Sayeed and Halawa's appeal. But even so, as they waited for their case to be heard, those months in prison were even harder than before, because they were losing hope. Then, some news. Their appeal case would finally be heard in October 2021, and Professor Brigitte Essen's new expert report could be included.
The video evidence does not show FGM type 1, nor any other type of FGM. I judged the genitalia to be unmutilated because the videos of September 16th and 19th and December 6th, 2016 show evidence of intact, undamaged, and unharmed clitoris with no bleeding.
This new medical evidence was the first grounds in the appeal hearing. The second one was the interpretation issues around when Sayeed took the stand in Trial 1.
Language expert Dr. Mary Phelan, who we've heard from in previous episodes, was the other new expert the defence presented to the court. The points Mary made were pretty simple. Because of the poor French interpretation, would the jury in Trial 1 have been able to even understand what Sayeed was saying when he gave evidence?
And there's a lot of confusion with words like feet and legs. Basic French, you can't get more basic than that. They got confused. And there's a lot of confusion about the toy. Was the child on the toy, standing on the toy? Were her legs astride of the toy? What was going on? And the interpreter really makes a very poor job of that and just causes incredible confusion in the court, basically. and the defendant can't give his side of the story properly or in a way that everybody in the courtroom, including the jury, can actually understand.
The three judges listened to everything being put to them by both the prosecution and the defence. After a few agonising weeks of waiting, in mid-November 2021, the Court of Appeal delivered their judgment, which is pretty stark.
It seems to us that, insofar as the appellant's trial was concerned, it must be regarded as having been unsafe and unsatisfactory, for not having complied with either the spirit or the substance of what is required by the Interpretation and Translation Directive in order to safeguard the fairness of the proceedings, and in particular to ensuring that the appellants were properly able to exercise their right of defence.
The interpretation issues were so bad and so obvious for everyone to hear in Sayeed and Halawa's first trial that was what the appeal court ruled on.
No direction was made on the now conflicting medical evidence. But in any event, what all of this meant was Sayeed and Halawa's convictions were now quashed and they could finally be freed from jail.
It was now almost 750 days since they had first walked into the courts of justice to face trial.
Watching on from live video calls in prison, they could not believe their eyes and ears.
I remember I ran from the room and all the girls were all locked in their rooms. And I was saying this in the middle of the corridor. I am getting out!
The day of the court decision, I see in the video that they say we have won the appeal. All I can think is, I will buy my children a lot of toys. I cannot come empty. Daddy is bringing something home.
With this court decision, there was no Garda press briefing on the steps of the court, no commentators giving opinion in the media. The overturning of Sayeed and Halawa's conviction didn't attract anything like the coverage their initial conviction received.
News of Halawa's release and conviction being overturned did grab the attention of some fellow prisoners, though.
Before I got out, some girls came to me. They were saying, "Sorry we didn't believe you." And some of them were saying, "Sorry we bullied you. I apologize."
Finally granted their freedom, Sayeed and Halawa returned home after 2 years behind bars to see their 3 young children. 7-year-old Aisha remembered her mama and daddy straight away. But as for her 2 younger siblings...
I opened the door and they look and they're not sure who I am. When I left, my smaller girl was 3 years old, but now she's not sure who I am. And she's saying, "Are you mommy?" And I was saying, "Yes." And she's saying, "Oh my God, are you mommy? Are you real? I want to see you and touch you." I was crying and sad as well, but I have to hold my tears.
And what about Halawa's son, who she was breastfeeding when sent to prison?
My boy was not even 1 year old when I was put in prison. He looked at me and I said, "Come to mommy, come to me." And he went like, "No, who are you? I don't want to come to you. Who are you?"
It's not like a switch was flicked when Sayeed and Halawa got out of prison and everything went back to normal. They had lost their home, they had lost their children, and now they had to try and rebuild everything. And that took time.
When Sayeed and Halawa had been released from jail, they'd actually only been left out on bail because the state was not giving up on its right to put them on trial again, for a second time, to face the same charges all over again.
They're saying we're going back for another trial, and afterwards, maybe we're going back to jail again. And I was shocked. I thought, after so long, this is finished. I have to go back and sign on again at the Garda station. And I don't have accommodation for me and my children and my husband.
We're now in 2022. And as Sayeed and Halawa are searching for a new home for their family, they also have to prepare to face a retrial, which was always going to be a likely outcome.
So you start from scratch again, but critically with the presumption of innocence and with the opportunity of putting evidence before the jury
Unlike the first trial, for this second trial, the medical experts on both sides will now present diametrically opposite findings.
In June 2023, the second trial of Sayeed and Halawa began at the Courts of Justice. It lasts 18 days, with, strangely, very little media coverage.
It was another trial. I was more experienced this time. I have my bag with me always. I have everything with me.
It was different because Professor Birgitta Essen, the expert, was there. And she said, no FGM. Aisha was perfect. So we had hope that maybe we will get justice.
Sayeed and Halawa now wondered if they were convicted again for a second time, could that mean that they'd be sent to jail for 5, 7, or even 10 years for something that never happened?
The jury in this trial were going to hear a lot of medical evidence, a lot of descriptions of female genitalia, at times very detailed medical, graphic information, which most of us would find difficult to follow or even at times fully understand, something the defence solicitors were very aware of.
You know, it was heavy evidence because, first of all, you'd scientists, and therefore they are very much speaking the language of their specialism. And, you know, for the lawyers, they all had to get their heads around that.
And I prepared myself for going to trial again.
Professor Birgitta Essen.
I prepared a PowerPoint presentation with my videos. I made it in a logical way so I could guide the jury about my findings. And I also tried to make it as simple language as possible, because some error that we doctors commit is that we start using words that is not useful for a jury, for example.
It's only in trial 2 that we begin to hear how the UK FGM expert for the DPP, Dr. Hodes, disagrees with some of the Irish consultants in how they identified parts of Aisha's anatomy.
The 3 Irish consultants involved in this case had no expertise in FGM in children, and under cross-examination, their opinions also began to differ.
On the other hand, Professor Essen's evidence is really quite simple. The videos of Aisha's injury clearly show her clitoris is entirely undamaged in any way. And she repeats that a new physical examination of Aisha will be further proof of that.
For Sayeed and Halawa, this trial was another grueling marathon.
And I kiss my kids to say, maybe today we won't come back. I have to accept it. Then I bring my bag with me and my book to read. And I switch off. I don't want to listen to anything in the court.
Another difference from trial 1 is that Sayeed does not take the stand in trial 2.
I didn't give any evidence because I didn't see that it will do any good.
It was into early July 2023 before this second trial eventually reached its conclusion when the jury returned their verdicts.
And the jury couldn't agree the FGM charge. And the judge told them, try again, you know. They were trying for 2 days to have agreement.
The second trial ended with no agreement among the jury members, what's termed a hung jury.
And you often see that cases, when they become complicated, it becomes a challenge for the jury to bring back a unanimous verdict on either side. And then the state said that they wanted another, so this would be the 3rd full trial.
The DPP requested a date for a 3rd trial, and that was scheduled to take place in January of 2024.
And it was in preparation for that 3rd retrial that the physical examination was organised and the results made available to the state.
You'll remember that when Aisha's parents were in prison back in 2021, the appeal court refused permission for a physical examination of her.
But no, in December 2023, this new medical examination would finally make everything crystal clear.
The DPP had a huge development in their case behind the scenes. A bombshell, really. Their expert, Dr. Deborah Hodes, she was now unavailable and unwilling to be involved in this case any longer.
With the DPP's expert now gone, she was unable to attend the physical examination that Professor Essen was about to undertake of Aisha at a clinical examination room in the Mater Hospital in Dublin.
Professor Essen started by explaining everything to a now 9-year-old Aisha.
So I brought my little dolls. I have some small dolls from my family in Sweden. And I started a conversation with her, showing this is my son, this is my daughter, and this is me. And then she started to play with the dolls. And then I told her about my job. I'm a specialist in the genitalia, you know, the women's part. And then we start laughing a little bit. And then I said, you know, I'm helping women giving birth, and do you think that you can sit in your mother's knee? And after a while, we had a very, as I thought, a trustworthy relation. And I felt also that the mother had a very good relation with the girl. She was fine.
Professor Essen then examines Aisha's vaginal area.
She was very relaxed, and the skin was soft, and it was flexible, no signs of scars. The external clitoris just open there under the prepuce. That's the sign of not having type 1 or type 2 of the classification. And so it was an intact genitalia. Nothing was cut.
This is the moment which confirms everything for Professor Essen. No FGM, no scar, nothing.
So the state were then going to have to explain that in any third trial.
It wasn't even clear at this stage whether a third trial would proceed, because the DPP now had a decision to make. Continue fighting this case, or accept Professor Essen's medical evidence that FGM never took place.
So what did the DPP do?
They got a new expert.
The new expert the DPP brought on board was also from Sweden. Dr. Cecilia Berger.
The traditional FGM is usually performed without anesthetics.
Dr. Berger is also an advocate of the global movement End FGM. And while she could not speak with us directly, she regularly speaks out against FGM.
The WHO is very against this, of course.
Yeah. You might be wondering why both medical experts in this case were now Swedish. It's because Sweden was one of the first countries in Europe to enact specific FGM legislation back in the early 1980s. So they've built up a lot of FGM expertise over the years. The DPP's new expert witness viewed everything the DPP gave her.
Dr. Berger's report includes that on admission to Crumlin Children's Hospital, it's recorded that while Aisha did have some blood stains in her nappy, there was no active bleeding from her injury.
This tallies with what Sayeed and Halawa told us from the very outset of this series, that when they first brought their daughter to hospital, they were told that everything was fine and they could go home.
But those medical notes also say that Aisha did bleed when her injury was being examined.
The conclusion to Dr. Berger's report was very succinct.
The vulvar lesions/injuries are not compatible with FGM. Hence, a case of FGM is not disclosed.
With a further note or comment which includes,
it seems unlikely that the occurrence of the visible injury should have been caused by an attempt to perform such a procedure.
The new experts agreed wholly with Professor Essen, concluding that not alone had an active FGM not occurred, it hadn't even been attempted.
The DPP asked Dr. Berger to reassess everything again.
And a few months later, Dr. Berger wrote back to the DPP for a second time to confirm no FGM or attempt at FGM had taken place on Aisha.
Now that the DPP knew they had twice prosecuted Sayeed and Halawa for a crime their own FGM expert was now saying never happened, they had yet another decision to make.
Sayeed and Halawa's defence teams now wanted the DPP to acknowledge an appalling miscarriage of justice had taken place. And at a court hearing in July of 2024, the DPP came back with their answer.
They ultimately proposed to discontinue the prosecution, so entering what we call a nolle prosequi.
This nolle prosequi, that's a legal mechanism whereby the state no longer pursues the prosecution, but neither do they ask for the charges to be dismissed, or crucially, ask a judge for an acquittal.
What this all means for Sayeed, Halawa and their 3 children is that they're left in a legal limbo. The state is not saying they're guilty, but neither are they saying that they've been acquitted.
And what that means is that this fight for justice is not over.
Where we are now is that we have to apply to the Court of Appeal again on the basis of what we say is a newly discovered fact and seek from that court a certificate of miscarriage of justice. In this case, the best evidence wasn't available until the physical exam took place, and therefore the facts were in dispute. And the position we're in now today is that they are not in dispute.
So what now for Sayeed and Halawa and their 3 children?
Now we are in the limbo again, and our legal team is trying to launch a case for a miscarriage of justice certificate to recognize that from the beginning, we are innocent.
They know what happened, but they don't want to answer that or even apologize and say this injustice has happened.
Throughout 2025, as Sayeed and Halawa's legal teams turned up for multiple court hearings around a miscarriage of justice application, the DPP sought delay after delay.
This almost Kafkaesque trial process is continuing on. The state have not accepted the logic of their own expert opinion, namely no crime was committed, and that therefore the client should be accorded the recognition that they had been a victim of miscarriage of justice.
In the most recent affidavit entered by the DPP in this case, they appear to be still backing the evidence of Dr. Hodes, who is no longer involved in the case, instead of what their new expert witness, Dr. Berger, has told them, that no FGM ever took place.
The disagreement between the various medical/expert witnesses as to the nature and cause of the injury to Aisha has not been resolved.
Sayeed and Halawa's case raises so many questions around medical evidence, around translations in our courts, around the behaviour of the DPP in this case, and the cost of pursuing this couple over the last 10 years for a crime that never happened. The biggest question of all, though, is why did the system fail? And now that we know it did, what needs to change to make sure it never, ever happens again?
If the system had worked, this would never have been prosecuted.
On October 10th, 2025, President of the Court of Appeal, Ms. Justice Caroline Costello, told the couple's legal teams that she was granting a certificate of miscarriage of justice hearing, and that it would take place in mid-January 2026.
Our past has already happened, but in the present, we are suffering again because our family life and our children's lives were destroyed.
Sayeed and Halawa will only tell their children what happened when they have proof of their innocence and are holding their miscarriage of justice certificates.
My children, they were born here and they are Irish. They know only Dublin and Ireland.
As we've recorded with Sayeed and Halawa over the last 15 months, we've got to know them a bit. They're amazingly strong individuals, and as a couple, open, honest and brave beyond belief. They never gave in. We're actually in awe of how they and their children have made it through the last 10 years in one piece.
What's also very clear is, despite all the obstacles, difficulties, treatment and huge failings that they've faced, Ireland is Halawa and Sayeed's home. Yes, they've lost trust in the system and in the state itself, but not in the Irish people.
Whether Sayeed and Halawa's case will be ruled, as their defence teams describe it, an appalling miscarriage of justice, and whether this state and our system recognises what happened to this family, only time will tell.
We will look back and say how we were strong to go through all those and come back still alive and still happy and enjoy life and appreciate small things.
Thank you.
You are more than welcome.